Okay, hi. This is the second screencast in setting up our VM Workstation virtual testbed environment. And today what we're going to be doing is installing the client, getting the two machines, the server and the workstation, talking to each other, and then installing Active Directory and creating a domain controller. So just to review a couple things. Again, this is my Windows server that we installed yesterday, and here again are the settings. We talked about memory, processors, hard disk. We talked about all that. What we're going to be talking about and focusing on today is the network adapter and connecting both machines together. So I'm just going to keep this off for now, and what we're going to do is go back to the home screen, and we're going to create a new virtual machine. And then as that is going to be created, I'm going to be talking. I'll talk about the network settings. So just like last week, we are going to go ahead and stick with typical. And again, this is just a review of last week. We're going to be going and browsing that ITnet Gold folder for the Windows 7 Professional image, which is right there. Remember, that's in your ITnet Gold folder on your, I believe it's on you guys, it's on your D drive. Okay, so this is exactly what we did last week. I'm going to click Open. It's going to recognize again that Windows 7, that it's a Windows 7 install from the ISO image. I'm going to click Next. Again, we're not going to be putting in a product key because we aren't going to be installing, activating it. Now again, this is important because we're going to be using, this is important for this install because Home Basic and Home Premium do not have some of the features. You would never see Home Basic or Home Premium in the Enterprise. So you want to make sure you select Windows 7 Professional for what we're going to be doing. Okay? And again, just like before, just to reiterate, if I were to license key code this, I would then have to, after the fact, I would have to have a Windows 7 Professional license key code in order to license key code it after the fact. So in the real world, if I was choosing this, this would be of some importance because the license key code would have to match it. And obviously, if I had a license key code for Windows 7 Professional, I could put that in right now. Again, we're going to use password 01. Yeah, we're not. Remember, we're not installing Windows Server again. We're installing Windows 7. That's why you had to change the ISO image. We're going to select Next. It says, you did not enter. Would you like to continue? Yes. Again, we're installing Windows 7. It's going to be put in that default directory of My Documents, Virtual Machines. That's fine. We're going to click Next. Again, we're going to reduce this to 20 gigabytes, and we're going to store the virtual disk in a single file, just like we did with server. Okay. We're going to click Next. There it all is, and we're going to click Finish. And it's going to start installing my Windows 7 machine. So again, this is exactly like we did with Windows Server, except now we're installing Windows 7. Okay, so I'm going to go back. As this is going, I'm going to kind of go back and forth, but I want to talk about the network adapter settings. Okay. So we didn't talk about this last week, but this is going to obviously play a role or be important this week because we're going to actually get these two machines set up and talking to each other. Okay. So, last week I wasn't worried about it. So, there are 3 different network configurations for VM Workstation, and if you go and search for the documentation, so all I did was a Google search for VM Workstation 9 network settings. And what pops up, now I know I'm on 8, but it's the same thing. Even 7, it's the same thing, But this is the PDF. There's a very good PDF on the VM Workstation site for each of the editions of VM Workstation. And it's a very well written document. So my suggestion is when or if you have questions regarding the usage of VM Workstation, that you access this document from VMware, and it really is a well-written document. Okay, so it walks you through all the stuff that I'm showing you, doing you, and probably goes even into more depth and detail in regards to how VM Workstation works. Okay, so what I'm going to be concerned about is the networking part of it. So if I scroll down, there is a section on configuring network configurations. Okay, so what you will see is the first thing that you want to get accustomed to is that there are virtual switches, virtual network adapters. There's actually a virtual DHCP server operating within VM Workstation if you choose to use them. Okay. So these are all, and again, what you can think about like this, right? We're virtualizing the operating systems, right? So what's happening is we can also virtualize within that environment or mimic within that environment the devices that we're using to connect those virtual machines together. Just like we do in the physical world, right? I mean, if I take two computers and I want to connect them together, I use a switch. I connect them to the switch, and they're connected, right? I mean, yeah, I say hub, but switches are really what we're going to be what you'd be talking about. If I wanted to get DHCP, so for example, in here, when your physical machines come onto the network, they contact the DHCP server that's running on that Cisco router, and they get an IP address from there. Well, I could do the same thing internally, which within this VM Workstation environment. So you can, again, you don't stray away from thinking that this doesn't mimic the physical world. It does. It exactly mimics the physical world. Okay? So there are three different network configurations, and I'm gonna read these so that you hear them, and then I'll go back to the configuration. I'll also need to periodically double check my Windows running. Okay, so that's okay. Okay, so NAT. We all know what NAT is right now, network address translation. And so there's a NAT setting. So with NAT, right, a virtual machine does not have its own IP address on the external network. Instead, a separate private network is set up on the host system, right, within VM Workstation. In the default configuration, a virtual machine gets an address on this private network from the private virtual DHCP server within Workstation. Okay? The virtual machine and the host system share a single network identity that is not visible on the external network. When you install Workstation on a Windows or Linux host system, a NAT network, VMNet 8, is set up for you. When you use the new virtual machine wizard to create a new virtual machine and select the typical configuration, the wizard configures the virtual machine to use the default network. You can only have one NAT network. Okay, so in plain English, well, that is plain English. I don't know how much it can be less explained. But when we pulled up Windows Server and when we pull up Windows 7 in this lab, if we were using NAT networking, would the DHCP server that's running in the classroom recognize those devices and assign an IP address to those virtual machines? No, because the workstations remain on a private network. Now, they may be able to get out, but their traffic would look like it's coming from what? The host machine, the local machine, right? Exactly. So, and then VMware would be directing the traffic to the workstation when it came into the machine, right? So it went at those those additional machines that we're pulling up would not be additional machines on the host network in a NAT setting. All right. So that private network, right, still remains somewhat isolated from the broader network. And only in the fact that really they're not recognized as other individual machines. But this, if I ran services or things like that using NAT, those services they would be looking like they were coming from that local host. So like if I ran Active Directory or something on one of these machines and I was running NAT, in theory, it could look like that I'm installing an Active Directory device on my host network, my local area network. So it's not truly isolated, okay? Oh, I skipped bridged. Bridged is the other one, all right? And bridge networking connects a virtual machine to the network by using the network adapter on the host system. If the host system on a network, bridge networking is often the easiest way to give a virtual machine access to that network, right? A bridge VLAN is set to VMnet 0 and is set up for you. So what does that mean? What does that mean? So if we're on bridged and we all pull up a virtual machine on our hosts, what would that look like on the network? That would look like we're adding another what? Yeah, no, well, it would look like we're adding another physical device to the network. It's just another computer, right? So, for example, in here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 people running virtual machine, or 14 people running virtual machines. If we were running under bridged, what would happen is those virtual machines would all be recognized as a new machine within this network, and they would get an IP address from the DHCP server that's running locally in this network. You understand that? So it would be just like it would be like if you came in and plugged a laptop in here, right? If you came in here and you plugged a laptop to the physical switch, you would get it would get an IP address from the DHCP server in the classroom, and there would be another physical device connected to the network. And that's the same thing that happens in bridge networking. Okay? Host only is the one that we're going to be using, right? I did. All right, so I don't know how long that was muted, but people could have seen what I did. I'm sorry. God darn it. I'll have to go back, but at least you got to see what I did on here. Okay, so what I did then is I opened up my Windows 7 machine, and my Windows Server machine, and I typed in ipconfig, and I have the IP address that we put in last week, right? So I go to Start, Command Prompt, and type in ipconfig. And you should have the address 10.1.1.1. And we did that last week. We're gonna go back into the Windows 7 machine and put another IP address in a second. Now remember, you can also get to a command prompt by going Start and going to the Run command and typing in CMD, and that will also open up a command prompt for you. And like I told you when we went through TCP/IP, ipconfig is going to be your best friend. Okay, so to get there on the server, I have two ways. One, I go to the Start menu, and there's typically a command prompt up here because it's used so extensively on a server. But I can also go here and type in CMD to the Run command, and that will also bring up the command prompt. And then I'm going to type in ipconfig. Okay. So it looks like, again, we have our Windows 7 machines. Our Windows Server machine set up. Then we're going to go back to our Windows 7 machine, and we're going to go back to Network Adapter, just like we did with the server. And we're going to change that to VMnet 1. So we're doing the exact same thing that we with the server. We're putting both of them on that custom host-only VMnet 1. Okay? And remember, from the documentation, host-only means that we're contained within the host machine. Our network's contained within the host machine. So once we've done that, we can go ahead and power on our Windows 7 machine. And anybody guess what we're going to do next? Yes, we're going to go in and give our Windows 7 machine a static IP address so that they are both on the same network and subnet. Yep. What do you mean the password? Can you just get in without the password? If you leave the password blank, it won't let you in as admin? Oh. Mm-mm. Yeah, yeah. So, okay, is everybody with me? I feel like I'm losing. So did you have the IP address of 10.1.1.1 on your server? You did not have that? Okay. Yeah, well, that's why it's going to be hard to keep up when we didn't have the server installed already. Okay, so why for people that didn't have the correct IP address on their server, watch me now, because setting the IP address on the client would be the same way you would set it on the server. Okay? And you've done this in the lab. You should have done this in the lab sim where you went in and changed IP settings. So again, if I go here and I type in CMD and I pull up ipconfig and I do an ipconfig, right? I get the 169 address, just like we did with the server, right? And the 169 address means it's that automatic IP addressing that's given out by Windows when the operating system cannot find a what? DHCP server, right? Dynamic host. So what I already know then that this machine is set to obtain an IP address automatically, but it can't find a DHCP server, so it just assigns that 169.254 address. So then what I do, and this is the same way you would set the IP address on the server, is I go to Start, I go to Control Panel, right? I go to Network and Internet. I go to View Network Computers and Devices. I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. View Network Status and Tasks. So I go to View Network Status and Tasks. And then I go to Change Adapter Settings. Okay? So I'll do it again. I go to Start. I go to Control Panel. I go to Network and Internet. I go to View Network Status and Tasks. And then I go to Change Adapter Settings. And this is my local area network adapter. I right-click. I go to Properties. I go to TCP/IP version 4. And I go to Properties. And there it is. It's set to obtain. And so what I do then is I go use the following IP address, and I go 10 .1.1.2. I tab and I get the subnet mask. We're not worried about a default gateway because we're not going to the outside world. And if you remember what I said last week, our DNS server is going to be our Windows Server 2008. So I go to so what I do is I point that to 10.1.1.what? 1. Okay? So my settings on my server would be identical to this, except my IP address would be 10.1.1.1.
So we don't have to have the default gateway.
Well, we're in a host only. We're not going to be using a default gateway because we're not going to the outside world.
Okay, so using it will help you get to the outside world as far as.
Well, yeah, but I'd have to set up a default gateway, and we're not going to set up a default gateway.
So what does it mean, the outside world? Like
To get to the internet, yeah, or to get to even another computer on this network. We're not going to be able to do that. But, I mean, think about it this way: if we were all to go and change our host computers to the same IP address, what would happen?
They would domain collision?
Yeah, well, they wouldn't work. You'd all pop up. Remember, I mean, you all have to have the unique IP address on the network that you're on, right? So here, we know because we're all using the same IP addresses for our server and our client that these virtual machines are limited to the host computers. Because we're not going to get like duplicate IP address and everything's going to work. Our host IP addresses are unique, but our host IP addresses are being gotten from the DHCP server that's running in the classroom. This is just a self-contained network where we put on our own static IP addresses. I mean, could we set up a third machine and run a DHCP server and have it obtained from a DHCP server? Yes, we could do that. Okay? We're just not doing it, and this is something that you can do. And when you take the Microsoft classes, it's stuff you will do. Okay? You will set up a DHCP server for it. So, but in here, we're just creating a static, isolated network of two computers, a client and a server, that reside on the same subnet. Right? So again, that was the question last week. If I change this to 10.2.1.2, is that going to be on the same subnet as the 10.1.1.1? No, it's not. And you can prove this. I mean, after we're done, you can prove this to yourself, because you could go ahead and change one of those IP addresses and try to ping, and they won't ping. They won't talk to each other because they're on different subnets. Okay? So, that it's what we're doing right now, is fairly basic 101. So again, what I do is I click on OK, I click Close, I click here, and then I go back and do IP config. And I should have an address of 10.1.1.2. Now, what would be the next networking step that I would take to figure out if I have connectivity? Ping it. So go ahead and try to ping from your client 10.1.1.1, right? Which is the server. You failed, right? Yeah, you're not getting a reply, right? It timed out. Okay. $100,000 question. $100,000 question. What's preventing me from pinging my server from my client right now? Well, it should be, yeah. I mean, and what would be what would be preventing it? The what? We don't need it. We're it doesn't matter. We're wired. We're in that. We're out. We're wired virtually. We're in that We're all both on that VMnet 1. Doesn't matter. We're on that VMnet 1, and if you go look at the documentation, we're connected through a switch. So we're on the same subnet. What possibly could be preventing us from pinging? Okay, Windows Server is not accepting is like 1/3 of the right answer, but why? There you go. Bingo, 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 bingo. The firewalls are on. The firewalls are on both local machines. So when I try to ping back and forth, the firewalls are preventing that ICMP request, right? And so what we need to do, and again, for testbed environments, you could go in right now, you could go into the firewalls, and you could allow the port that ICMP comes on, you could open it. But we're not going to go, we're not going to do that for the sake of here. What we're going to do is we're going to go turn off the Windows firewall.
In the server or in both of them?
Both of them. So to get to the Windows Firewall and Windows Server, it's Start, Control Panel. Then you should see a box down here that says Windows Firewall. I click on it. I want to change the settings. It's going to say, do you sure you want to do this? And we're going to turn it off. Okay? So we're going to turn it off. So again, I'll do that again. I'm on the server. I go to Start, Control Panel, Windows Firewall, Change Settings, continue, and I turn it off.
On the Windows 7, couldn't I keep the private one, turn the private one off and keep the public one on?
For the sake of easiness, for this setup, we're gonna turn them both off. Yeah. So for Windows 7, again, I go to Control Panel, I go to System and Security, I go to Windows Firewall, and I turn it. There's a box there to turn off or on. I just turn off both firewalls. And I click that, and then guess what? Yep, like magic. So here's my reply from my server. And if I go to server and I ping my client, I get a reply. Well, Windows comes with built-in software firewalls, right? And those firewalls prevent ICMP from getting through. Now, again, when you learn more about firewalls, I could have gone in and I could open up the port, right, on my firewall to allow ICMP connections, and then it would ping. But again, we're doing this not for the sake of working with firewalls. We're doing for the sake of setting up a client-server testbed. Okay. So, I mean, again, you can play with the firewalls if you want and figure it out, but for the sake of this testing and for what we're doing, I'm not going to get bogged down on working with the firewalls. But, I mean, everybody in here should understand that the firewall is what's preventing that ping from going through, right? It's stopping it. I mean, again, think back to Warriors of the Net, right? It's rejecting those packets, not allowing those packets through locally on the client. That reply is the reply, the time that it takes for and the packets that it took from going from your client to your server or server and client. It's the same thing we were doing when we ping physical machines. It's the same process. No, I'm on the server. I did both. I pinged from each machine. I pinged from the server to the client, and I pinged from the client to the server. Okay? So here I pinged 10.1.1.1, which is my server, and then on the server I went. So this is the same thing that you'd be doing with physical machines. Nothing is different. Okay? I put in static IP addresses. I went and I did IP configs. Then I went in, I pinged to check for physical connectivity, and it was successful. Which means right now that my two virtual machines are connected through a virtual switch, they're on the same subnet, and they're physically able to communicate with each other. Okay?
What is that one? Is that the port that they talking through? So the virtual port they talking through?
The 128.
When they say TTL equal 128?
No, TTL is time to live. Time to live. So when you ping something, that packet will only, again, it doesn't really make much sense or difference on a host-only virtual machine environment. But if I ping something elsewhere, that packet will only live for a certain period, because otherwise it would just keep bouncing back and forth. So a ping is set to only go for a certain amount of time, and if it doesn't get a response, that's why you got that request times out. It just goes away, right? There's a lot of stuff you can do from it. Well, you can do a tracer. You can do, yeah. Well, you're not going to be able to do it from there because you can't get to the outside world. So, I mean,
Is there like a list of command properties we could like download or get people with to make stuff like well known to us?
um,
Because this is my first time dealing with it.
well, and that's why though I'm not the stuff that I want you to be accustomed to is I thought it gave a list here, but maybe not. There's some stuff in the lab sim. Otherwise, you can look. I don't. The purpose of this class is to get through you guys' heads. IP config and ping. Most people that I still deal with, when I used to deal with them and they come in, they won't even do that when they had network problems. So if you don't get accustomed, all the other ones are more advanced for more advanced problems. DNS NS lookup for DNS issues, things like that. You'll use NS lookup when you get to Active Directory because Active Directory relies on DNS so much. But again, I really just want to get you accustomed to this thought process of what we just did, which is we set up static IP addresses, we made sure they were on the same subnet, we turned off the firewall, we IP config to make sure that we had the addresses correct, and then we pinged to establish physical connectivity.
I just want to answer my own question. It's like a website. It's called like SS64.
Yeah, there's a ton of different stuff out there. The reality though is that for beginning network students, I still see people like send me emails and call, and I always ask them, well, what was that? Did you ping? Did you IP? And they're like, oh no. So what you got to get in your brain, in your head, is this process that we just went through is the key initial process anytime I bring a device onto a network. Okay? It's to make sure I have the correct IP address. How am I getting that IP address? You probably would know, if there was a DHCP server, you would know something about the network, hopefully. And then also, can I ping? All right. And when we get to troubleshooting, I'll talk more a little bit about pinging stuff too. So, okay. So we're gonna do one more thing today, and that's gonna be creating our server into a domain controller. Okay. So we'll do one more thing, and then next week we'll come back and we'll join the domain, and we'll create a user, and we'll share some stuff, and we'll do that kind of stuff. So, but what we're going to do is today we're going to create our Windows server to be a domain controller. Okay. Now let me just talk for a second about Windows Server and how it is configured. Right. So when you install Windows Server is what we call a standalone server. Okay? It's a standalone server. It's not running any services by default. It's not running, it's not acting like an authentication server. It's not doing anything. It's just a standalone server. So anytime we install Windows Server, it's a standalone server. What could it be used for? Well, typically in a domain, not much, because at the very least, a standalone server would join the domain, which we'll do next week. Okay, but the standalone server. Then the next role that a server can play is it can join the domain. And again, you'll see this next week because we'll have our client join our domain. But the next elevated role for a server in a Microsoft environment is a domain controller. Okay? Is a domain controller. And what makes a Windows Server a domain controller is the installation of Active Directory. Okay? Active Directory. Once a server on a network becomes a domain controller, that domain controller on the network is like every other domain controller on that network. They contain a full working copy of Active Directory. Okay? Now, the big thing that separates a server that becomes or joins part of a domain, that might be a file and print server, that might be a DHCP server, might be a DNS server, might be a SQL server, might be whatever, right? The big difference between a domain controller and all that is what? Anybody know? What does a domain controller do specifically? Okay, it's kind of the administrator, but it's the server that authenticates people, right, on the network. And when you authenticate, when you're on a network and you're an end user, right, and you put in your username and password, right, what then that gives you is certain access to certain resources on the network that the network administrator has made available to you, right? Active Directory is the directory that keeps track of you and the attributes that you have as a user and what you have access to, what resources you have access to on the network. Okay? It's that easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, we're going to go back to the server, and we're going to go start. Now, everybody is everybody with me at this point? No? I can work with you. Well, you guys fell kind of behind because...
Do we just go to roles? Can you just type an IP config on Windows 7 real quick?
Okay, for people that have fallen a little behind, I can help you after class. And remember, this is all recorded, so you can go back and look at this. And if you didn't do it, you should have done it. You can go back and look at this, this week. And again, I told you last week, one of the important things is to do this, mimic it at home, so that it sinks in. So what we're going to do with the domain controller is we're going to go to the command prompt and we're going to type in DC promo. So even if you got the IP settings or things like that not set up correctly, you should do this, because I can come back and retroactively fix your IP addresses. All right. So what I'm on the Windows Server 2008. I go to the Start menu and I type in DC promo. Now again, DC promo. Okay. All right. Yes, exactly. Domain controller promotion. And then I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to prompt me to continue, and it's going to say, okay, is Active Directory installed on this server? Now, there's a couple things to note. If I go to Start and I go to Administrative Tools, what you'll notice is I have a limited amount of administrative tools. I also have no tools that currently here reference Active Directory. That's one way I can tell that this is not a domain controller yet. There's nothing there that references Active Directory. All right? It's just acting as a local machine. Yeah, that means you made it a domain controller already. So what I'm going to do is, this is the Active Directory Domain Services Installation Wizard. And what I'm going to do is then click Next. And it's going to give me operating system compatibility if I wanted to. It really refers back to Windows NT 4.0. My hope is, and my guess is, you're not going to be working in environments anymore, I hope, that have Windows NT, all right, which is the old version of Windows. And then you get another box that says, okay, do I want to creating. Well, like I said, I'm not. You're for now. I'm not gonna worry about it. A forest is a broader entity that connects domains together. All right. So that's what a forest is. So we're going to create a new domain in a new forest. Okay. And we're going to click next. And it's going to tell me, it's going to warn me that the local administrator account becomes the domain administrator. And what this means is that the account remember the administrator that we created with password 01 will now become the God domain account. And basically, when you get to the Windows stuff, you'll learn a lot that really the God domain account should be kind of locked under key and never used in the real world. That you would be creating additional administrator accounts to do it.
Oh, I was going to ask you about the account name and stuff like that. Because you said the local administrator account. So if I have a password on the server already under my name, then once I do Active Directory, then it changes.
No, it changes that. You'll still be able to log in as the admin, and you'd still be able to log in if you created a user. It's just that this is then now becomes that admin account, that original admin account becomes the God admin account. Yeah, that's the only thing. So then I'm going to click next. Next. I'm going to click OK. What? Oh, I see. I forgot about this. We got to change. We didn't make the password strong enough. So what it's saying is, it's saying that the local administrator is the password is not complete, is not strong enough. I forgot about this. No. What we need to do is we need to go and change. So I'm going to cancel out of my Active Directory install, and we need to go and change the administrator password. I think what I'm going to do is, how many people are having issues right now, or how many people have stayed up with me? Okay, so the majority of you. All right. So. And I know it's getting hot and everything, so I think I'm going to cut this into 2 screencasts. So we'll take a break because I know people are getting hot and antsy, and then I'll come back and we'll do a second one where we'll change the account password and install Active Directory. Okay.